Urban exploration, often abbreviated as urbex, is the exploration of man-made structures, usually abandoned ruins or hidden components of the man-made environment. Enthusiasts document their discoveries with photographs and videos, creating a unique blend of art and history. However, the thrill of exploring forgotten places can sometimes lead to terrifying experiences. Here are 3 true stories that will make you think twice before venturing into the unknown. St. Mary's Orphanage had been abandoned for decades, a grim monument to a dark chapter in the town's history. The children who had once lived there were said to have suffered terrible abuse at the hands of the staff, and their restless spirits were rumored to haunt the old building. Jenna, a local historian and urban explorer, decided to document the orphanage's history. She arrived at St. Mary's just as the last rays of sunlight were disappearing. The building loomed before her, its windows boarded up, and its walls covered in ivy. She found a broken window and climbed through, landing in a dusty, cobweb-filled hallway. Jenna turned on her flashlight and began to explore, her footsteps echoing eerily. She moved through the orphanage, taking pictures of the dilapidated rooms and the remnants of old toys and furniture. Each room seemed to tell a story of sorrow and neglect as she entered the main hall. She heard a faint sound, like the laughter of children. She froze, listening. The laughter grew louder, echoing off the walls. It seemed to be coming from the upper floor. Jenna hesitated, then decided to investigate. She climbed the grand staircase, each step creaking under her weight. The laughter continued, mixed with the sound of footsteps running down the hall. She reached the top and entered a long corridor lined with doors. The laughter was coming from the end of the hall. Jenna walked cautiously, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. As she approached the last door, it slowly creaked open. She stepped inside, and her flashlight revealed a room filled with old, dusty toys. Dolls with cracked faces, stuffed animals with missing eyes, and broken toy cars were scattered across the floor. The laughter stopped abruptly, and the room grew cold. Jenna felt a chill run down her spine. She turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind her. She was trapped. She pounded on the door, shouting for help, but no one answered. Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her. She turned slowly, her flashlight revealing the ghostly figure of a young girl standing in the corner. The girl's eyes were wide and filled with sadness, her pale face framed by dark, matted hair. She reached out a hand towards Jenna, her mouth moving silently. Jenna backed away, her heart pounding. The girl took a step forward, and Jenna felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow. She turned and pounded on the door again, desperate to escape. The door finally gave way, and she stumbled out into the hallway. Gasping for breath. She turned to look back at the door, but it stood ominously still, as if nothing had happened. The oppressive silence of the orphanage wrapped around her, thickening the air. Jenna's mind raced. She had come seeking history but found something far more sinister. Determined to uncover the truth, Jenna pressed on. She made her way to the administrative wing of the orphanage, hoping to find records or documents that might explain the tragic history. The door to the headmistress's office was locked, but a firm push with her shoulder forced it open, revealing a room cloaked in darkness. The scent of mildew and dust filled her nostrils as she stepped inside. Her flashlight beam scanned the room, illuminating a large oak desk covered in papers and a leather-bound ledger. Jenna carefully picked up the ledger, its pages yellowed and fragile. As she began to read, she discovered horrifying accounts of the orphanage's daily operations. The ledger detailed cruel punishments, neglect, and the mysterious disappearances of several children. Her heart ached as she read the names, realizing these were the very spirits that haunted the building. That a sudden noise broke her concentration. It was a soft sobbing, echoing from somewhere nearby. Jenna's blood ran cold as she recognized the unmistakable sound of a child crying. She put down the ledger and followed the sound, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The sobbing led her to a small, hidden door behind a large bookcase. She hesitated, her fear battling her curiosity. With a deep breath, she opened the door. It revealed a narrow, winding staircase descending into darkness. Jenna's skin prickled with apprehension as she started down the stairs, the sobbing growing louder with each step. At the bottom, she found herself in a dimly lit basement. The air was colder here, and the walls were lined with shelves holding old, forgotten toys and personal belongings of the orphanage's former residents. In the center of the room, huddled on the floor, was the spectral figure of a young boy. His clothes were tattered, and his face streaked with tears. Jenna's heart ached with pity. She knelt down, her voice gentle. "It's okay. I'm here to help. What happened to you?" The boy looked up, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. "They hurt us," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We were locked down here when we misbehaved. Some never came out." Jenna's heart pounded. She reached out to comfort him, but her hand passed through his ethereal form. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I'll find a way to help you." Suddenly, the temperature dropped even further, and Jenna felt a malevolent presence fill the room. She turned to see the ghostly figure of an old woman, her face twisted with rage. It was the headmistress, her spirit bound to the orphanage by the evil deeds she had committed. "You have no right to be here," the headmistress hissed, her voice echoing with supernatural fury. "These children are mine." Jenna backed away, her mind racing. She needed to get out, but she also needed to do something to free the spirits trapped in this place. Summoning her courage, she addressed the headmistress. "You can't keep them here forever. They deserve peace." The headmistress's form flickered, her expression shifting from anger to something almost like sorrow. "They're mine?" she repeated, but there was a note of desperation in her voice now. Jenna took a deep breath. "No, they're not. They never were. Let them go." For a moment, the room was silent, the tension palpable. Then, the headmistress let out a scream of fury and pain. The ghostly children began to appear around Jenna, their faces filled with hope. The headmistress's form began to waver and dissolve, her power over them weakening. Jenna felt a rush of cold air as the spirits of the children started to ascend, their expressions turning from fear to peace. The boy she had spoken to smiled at her, mouthing the words "thank you" before he vanished. Exhausted and shaken, Jenna made her way back up the stairs. She exited the orphanage, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as she stepped outside. The night air felt fresh and liberating against her skin. She knew she had done something important, something that would finally allow the spirits of St. Mary's Orphanage to rest. As she walked away, Jenna vowed to tell their story, to ensure that the suffering of those children would not be forgotten. The orphanage, now just a silent, dark silhouette against the night sky, seemed to stand as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Epilogue: Jenna's account of the haunting at St. Mary's Orphanage became a local legend. Her documentation of the orphanage's dark past and the spirits she encountered brought awareness and sympathy from the community. In time, efforts were made to memorialize the children who had suffered there, and the building was eventually demolished to make way for a peaceful park dedicated to their memory. Years later, on a quiet evening, Jenna visited the park. As she sat on a bench, she felt a gentle breeze and a sense of peace that told her the spirits of St. Mary's had finally found their rest. Hollow Creek Factory had once been the heart of a thriving industrial town, but after a devastating fire, it had been abandoned and left to decay. It became a local legend, with stories of ghostly apparitions and strange noises circulating among the townspeople. Danny, a seasoned urban explorer, decided to investigate these claims for himself. He arrived at the factory just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the crumbling building. The entrance was overgrown with weeds, and the metal doors were rusted shut. Danny found an open window and climbed through, landing in a large, empty room. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of burnt wood lingered. Danny turned on his flashlight and began to explore, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. He moved through the factory, taking pictures of the rusted machinery and the charred remains of the fire. As he approached the old assembly line, he heard a faint whisper that he stopped, straining to hear. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, but he couldn't make out the words. It seemed to be coming from the upper floor. Danny climbed the rickety staircase, each step creaking ominously. He reached the top and entered a room filled with old desks and filing cabinets. Papers were strewn everywhere, some charred at the edges. The whispering continued, louder now. Danny followed the sound to a corner of the room, where a large metal cabinet stood. The whispering was coming from inside. He hesitated, his hand on the cabinet door, then pulled it open. Inside was a small, dark space, empty except for an old, dusty book. Danny picked it up and opened it, revealing page after page of handwritten notes and sketches. The writing was erratic, almost frantic. As he flipped through the book, the whispering stopped abruptly. Danny's flashlight flickered, and he felt a chill run down his spine. He turned to leave, but the door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. He was trapped. He pounded on the door, shouting for help, but no one answered. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and he felt a presence behind him. He turned slowly, his flashlight flickering again, and saw a figure standing in the corner. It was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and lifeless. She reached out a hand towards him, her mouth moving silently, as if trying to speak. Danny backed away, his heart pounding in his chest. The woman took a step forward, and he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. He turned and pounded on the door again, desperate to escape. The door finally gave way, and he stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. He didn't stop running until he was outside, the cold night air filling his lungs. He looked back at the factory, its dark windows staring back at him like empty eyes. He knew he had seen something that night, something that defied explanation. The Hollow Creek factory was not just a relic of the past. It was a place where the past still lingered, haunting the present. Edgewood Asylum had stood on the outskirts of town for nearly a century, a grim relic of a bygone era. Long abandoned, its decaying walls and overgrown grounds were a favorite among urban explorers. Two friends, Mark and Lisa, decided to visit one weekend, armed with flashlights, cameras, and an insatiable curiosity as they stepped through the gaping entrance. The air seemed to grow colder, and a musty, damp smell enveloped them. They navigated through the debris-strewn hallways, the sounds of their footsteps echoing eerily through the empty corridors. Mark paused to take a photo of a crumbling mural, his flash momentarily illuminating the darkened hallway. In that brief flash, Lisa thought she saw a figure standing at the end of the corridor. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Mark turned his head, squinting into the darkness. "See what?" "There was someone there," Lisa insisted, but the corridor was empty. Shrugging it off as nerves, they continued exploring. They passed through rooms filled with decaying furniture, rusting medical equipment, and old patient files scattered across the floor. Each step seemed to amplify the sense of unease. They reached the basement, a place rumored to be where the worst experiments had taken place. The basement was pitch black, and their flashlights barely penetrated the darkness. They moved cautiously, the damp air thick with mildew. Suddenly, they heard a faint, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from deeper within the basement. Against their better judgment, they followed the sound, drawn to its unsettling regularity. They entered a room that appeared to be a storage area, filled with old hospital beds and rusty wheelchairs. The tapping grew louder. At the far end of the room, they saw an old metal door, slightly ajar. The tapping was coming from behind it. Mark pushed the door open, and their flashlights revealed a narrow staircase leading further down into the darkness. "Maybe we should turn back," Lisa suggested, her voice barely audible. Mark nodded, but as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. They were plunged into total darkness. Lisa screamed, and Mark fumbled for his flashlight, his hands shaking. When he finally managed to turn it on, the beam revealed something that made his blood run cold. Standing at the bottom of the stairs was a figure, barely visible in the weak light. It was a man, dressed in tattered, old-fashioned clothing. His eyes were wide and vacant, his mouth hanging open as if in a silent scream. The tapping continued, louder now, echoing off the walls. "We need to get out of here," Mark whispered, but the figure began to move towards them. Slowly, deliberately panicking, they rushed back towards the door, but it wouldn't budge. They pounded on it, screaming for help, but the figure kept coming, its footsteps echoing ominously. In a last desperate effort, Mark threw his shoulder against the door with all his strength, and it finally gave way. They burst into the hallway, their hearts racing, and sprinted for the exit. As they reached the main entrance, they glanced back to see the figure standing in the doorway of the basement, watching them with those haunting, empty eyes. They didn't stop running until they were outside, gasping for breath. They never returned to Edgewood Asylum, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they had awakened something that day, something that still lingered in the shadows of that forsaken place, of corrupt officials and Margaret herself. Jenna knew she had to bring these revelations to light, not only to ensure justice for the victims, but also to prevent such atrocities from being forgotten or repeated. Jenna wrote a comprehensive article detailing her findings. It was published in the local newspaper and quickly gained attention. The town was shocked and outraged as the grim truth about St. Mary's Orphanage spread. Public pressure mounted, and a formal investigation was launched into the orphanage's history and the role of local officials in the cover-up. The investigation led to the discovery of more hidden documents and personal accounts from former residents and staff. These testimonies painted a picture of systemic abuse and neglect, validating the haunting experiences Jenna had uncovered. The town council voted to demolish the orphanage and replace it with a memorial park dedicated to the memory of the children who had suffered and died there. On the day of the demolition, a crowd gathered to witness the end of St. Mary's. Jenna stood among them, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. As the wrecking ball swung into the building, she couldn't help but think of the spirits she had encountered. She hoped they had finally found peace. After the demolition, work began on the memorial park. It was designed to be a place of reflection and remembrance, with plaques bearing the names of the children who had lived at the orphanage and a statue depicting a group of children playing, free and happy at last. At the dedication ceremony, Jenna was invited to speak. She recounted her experiences at the orphanage, the spirits she had encountered, and the importance of remembering and learning from the past. As she spoke, she felt a gentle breeze and a sense of peace enveloping her, as if the spirits were present, thanking her for giving them a voice. Years passed, and the park became a cherished part of the community, a place where people could gather to remember and honor the innocent lives lost. Jenna continued her work as a historian and urban explorer, driven by a newfound sense of purpose. She knew that the shadows of the past could never be fully erased, but by bringing them into the light, she could help ensure they would never be forgotten. On a quiet evening, long after the park had opened, Jenna returned to the memorial. She sat on a bench, listening to the laughter of children playing nearby. She felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that she had made a difference. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the park, Jenna closed her eyes and whispered a silent promise to the spirits of St. Mary's. "You are free now. Rest in peace." And for the first time in many years, the night was silent and still, with no echoes of the past to disturb the tranquility of the present.